Eloise, and Vina. I'm glad people have been able to make it in. We've had a few tech difficulties with the invite, but it seems like everyone's making it in nicely and on time. So thank you, everyone. Charles, hello. And
Hi.
Tom. Hi, Charles. Monda.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hello.
Great. I think we're waiting for probably just a handful more. So we will just give it about a minute.
Okay.
Can see another new joiner. A couple more. A few people still filtering in. Okay, Shanaz, should we make a start then? So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming along today. Today I am Nick Talbot, Service Design Lead at Connected Places Catapult, and we are presenting a series of 3 events through the DIATOMIC program under the branding of Innovation in Procurement. Today is session 1, and we will be focusing on new legislation and less common procurement methods and approaches. Shanaz, would you like to put on the next video, please?
For millennia, cities have been places where bright ideas spark. From the earliest riverside trading posts that turned into today's sprawling megacities in the digital global economy. Cities can create positive experiences for people, always connected by technology. And when connected places work well, it's good for people and the planet. But making a connected place succeed is hard. There's loads of stakeholders, businesses, regulators, and community groups who want to be involved across every mode of transport, every type of building, the infrastructure that underpins them, and the data and digital platforms that connect them. All of this is needed to help people, communities, neighbourhoods, and local businesses to prosper. Now, More than ever, we need our connected places to succeed. We are in a climate emergency. Rapid urbanisation means 3/4 of us will be living in a city by 2050. And new technologies are revolutionising the way that we live, the way we work, and the way we travel, creating fantastic opportunities for innovation, jobs, and growth. At Connected Places Catapult, we connect people, places, and businesses for a future of sustainable growth and prosperity. We are the UK's innovation accelerator for cities, transport, and place leadership. We are trusted across government, industry, and academia, connecting new technologies, business models, and investment opportunities. So join with us and be better connected for a future of sustainable growth and prosperity.
Great. That was a quick introduction to Connected Places Catapult. There are some familiar faces on this call, either through the diatomic work or otherwise, but I'm aware there may be some new faces as well who are less familiar with our work. Hopefully that helps everyone to understand a little bit more about what we do. Zooming in now, I'd like to start just before we cover the agenda and the kind of series of sessions. Why is Connected Places Catapult involved in innovation in procurement? And by and large, it's because we have been involved in it for a few years now, and we've just achieved longer term funding to play a crucial role there, in especially as regards the public sector. So when it comes to IPEC, which stands for the Innovation Procurement Empowerment Centre, or Smarter Spending, which is the campaign and branding surrounding IPEC. In essence, it's boosting the use of innovative procurement to drive growth and regional renewal. So I'm just going to give a few quick insights that we've discovered along this journey where we've already been before, and just touch upon a few of these activities so you understand where we're sharing from and what we're kind of trying to work towards. Next slide, please. So the UK, of course, has an innovation strategy. Innovation seems to be a key part. Yes, it's probably a good point I should ask. There will be quite a lot of material today and quite a few speakers. So if everybody could possibly mute for the next while or so until we introduce questions and the opportunity later on in the session, that would be great. Thanks very much. So as I said, the UK innovation strategy, one of many pieces of kind of legislation and guidance coming from central government that's really important to this work, highlighting how procuring more innovative solutions, the public sector can be a driver of innovative new ideas, providing innovative firms with the foothold they need to succeed in the market. So what's key here is that the innovation serves the local government purposes, but it also can drive the local economy as those SMEs, those innovative SMEs grow. Next slide, please. And as Malcolm will be touching on later, this idea of procurement of innovation within the public space in particular has been growing. Next slide. And click again, Shanaz, and we'll see both figures here. So overall, the UK public sector spends around £300 billion with third-party suppliers. The UK local government part of that is about 70 billion. Next slide. And when we introduce IPEC and kind of the generality of topics we're talking about today, just to avoid any confusion, we're talking about the procurement of innovation and therefore the innovation of procurement processes. We see the both very much hand in hand. Next slide, please. And click a couple more times, Shanaz. So as we see, back a bit. There is a low appetite for risk and experimentation in public procurement. We'll be kind of peeling the onion a little bit for why that is over the course of the 3 sessions, and hopefully empowering. When I said Innovative Procurement Empowerment Centre, people might be wondering, what does empowerment mean? Well, one aspect of it is raising confidence and helping people to move from a risk-averse situation to a risk management situation. A few of those insights I was talking about 23% of UK tenders receive only one bid, and 5% of CBI members feel that procurement incentivizes innovation. So you can see that we've got a big problem with competition, and we've got a big problem with kind of existing suppliers, or large suppliers generally being those one bids, and a big problem with engaging SMEs and making them a part of the procurement process or the local government spending process. Next slide. So, Innovation Procurement Empowerment Centre, you can see on the left there, we've got a website. It's just been updated. This isn't a centre in a physical sense. It's more metaphorical in the sense that we're bringing people together. We're trying to kind of create a hub, both digitally and through community events and connections. So the website on the left there will take you through to the IPEC website. We're launching our first community event on Tuesday, the 12th of September. So that's next month, coming up soon. And it's free for local government to attend. We are focusing on local government stakeholders. I think for the first few community events, certainly, we may broaden out to SMEs and so on in time. But to start with, we're focusing on those public sector bodies. And next slide, please. So what does IPEC do? So remember, IPEC is the bigger kind of offering that Connected Places Catapult does, and this series of 3 sessions is a smaller part of it. But the bigger program, IPEC, we provide practical support. So we have cohorts of councils that we help. We do discovery with them, and then we help them through trialing and demonstration processes or upskilling in certain areas of procurement and smarter spending. The community events, which I just touched upon, and also the evidence base. You may have noticed on the earlier slide, we have the University of Birmingham and University of Manchester also coming along with us for the IPEC program. And we've discovered that there's quite a lack of evidence and research within procurement, where it's very limited. And so we're really trying to grow that evidence base with our academic partners. Next slide, please. And Malcolm, as you see in the top left there, is one of our speakers today. He is also part of the CRISP group. So the CRISP group is the Consortium for Research into Innovative and Strategic Public Procurement, very much aligned with the work we're doing in IPEC. Next slide, please. And so what are the outcomes of IPEC and smarter spending that we're trying to achieve? Well, first of all, we want a range of stakeholders to be more confident to harness innovation-friendly procurement mechanisms. And second of all, we want a greater volume of public sector spending to be accessible to innovative firms and non-traditional suppliers, and ideally local SMEs. Next slide. I'll just finish on the IPEC side of things with some relevant IPEC activities. As I mentioned before, there's been years of engagement, events and discovery activities. Some of that is with local government, some of it is with central government, some with suppliers and SMEs. A lot of the work that Connected Places Catapult does also involves SMEs as well as the public sector. IPEC 2022-23 cohort was completed in March this year. So as I said, we've already had a round of discovery and supporting a small group of councils much more intimately. On the bigger picture side of things, we've got the IPEC community event scheduled to start next month. And we've also got an IPEC cohort starting next year. So we will be communicating about that through the community events. But moving on to the Diatomic and our Innovation in Procurement series of 3. Shanaz, next slide. So, as I've said, a series of 3 events. They are dedicated specifically to the West Midlands. So if you want a broader perspective, broader topics from a range of local governments across the country, then the IPEC community is the place to go. These 3 sessions are much more focused on the West Midlands and actors in this space. Next slide, please, Shanaz. So what are these 3 sessions? Well, we did a little bit of discovery with some of the members of the audience here, and we're looking to perhaps do a little bit more as well to refine sessions 2 and 3. But in essence, session 1 is around new legislation and less common methods. That's today's session again. Session 2 will be around stakeholder relationships. and session 3 around gamified design contest. So what's one of the differences, say, between sessions 1 and 2 and 3? Well, 1, we're kind of laying out the lay of the land so that everybody understands where we're coming from, where we're going, and we're introducing a few speakers to touch upon some of the topics that will come up in session 2 and session 3 in more detail. I'll also say that session 1, as I've said, a lot of material, a lot of speakers. It's a bit more of a broadcast in that sense, whereas session 2 and session 3 will be far more interactive. We're really trying to encourage peer-to-peer learning. There'll be much more kind of discussion and smaller group work in relation to those. Next slide, please. And so what is the purpose of these innovation and procurement sessions? Next. So there's a number of purposes across the 3 sessions. So welcoming a wide range of stakeholders to the innovative procurement space, far beyond procurement. Ideally, we're looking at service teams, we're looking at data, insights, community engagement. We're looking at legal, finance professionals within councils, for example. All of these colleagues within local government and the public sector should all be playing a part in innovative procurement, but often maybe don't feel as much that they are an influence when they really are. We also look to provide insights, examples, and coaching facilitation where possible. Obviously, this is quite a small 3-session engagement, but happy to try and help where we can. Bring people together and create new connections, amplify and signpost to existing resources, contribute new ideas and innovate delivery of materials. So what that means is there are lots of players within the procurement space, whether it's SIPS, the professional body, or some people go through RICS. There's CCS, so Crown Commercial Services, Cabinet Office, these other kind of central government bodies, which are really important. There are consultancy firms who deliver kind of procurement services. What we want to do is not compete with those organizations and the materials they produce, but try and complement. We think there are a few kind of maybe innovative ways that when we deliver materials, I think particularly session 2 and 3 will give you an idea of what that is. But that's our kind of angle. And then evolve our understanding of problems in this space. So it's not all delivery. We very much welcome you to kind of share, because we're on a learning journey as well. We're trying to understand, and as I've said, there's this lack of evidence. So we're trying to really pick up and have our grounds to the ear to the ground even around some of these topics. Next slide. So innovation in procurement, I mentioned that idea of a learning journey, us being on one as well, but we've also crafted these 3 sessions with all of you in the audience in mind, trying to give you a learning journey of sorts. What does that mean? Well, it means that if people come to multiple sessions, hopefully there's a kind of a progression of thought, and each session can weave into the next in terms of content, but we have also designed them so that they are standalone as well. As I said, we've still in a period of discovery and design for sessions 2 and 3. So we won't be releasing dates for those events just yet. But obviously we have all of your addresses, so we will keep you in the loop with developments around those. Next slide, please. Sorry, on the previous slide, as I said, the first session is more theory. The second session is more about relationships. And the third session will be taking that theory, taking those hopefully improved relationships and trying to implement it in a practical way. So when we talk about that gamified design contest being a recognized procurement method, we will simulate a kind of a scenario-based process of what that would look like, including provocations and spanners in the works and stuff like that, so that people get used to it. And one of those insights that we discovered was that people do a lot of training in this space. They have a lot of toolkits and e-learning, but they get Monday morning blues and then they don't end up putting it into practice. So what we're trying to do is create a little platform that hopefully bridges that gap. And so that gamified design contest approach is that kind of practical, safe fail space, a bit of experimentation, so that when people go back to the office and have to try it out for the first time, they feel that little bit more confidence and they have a little bit of experience of kind of running through it. The purpose of today's session, next slide, Shanaz. So today in particular, we're raising awareness of opportunities in this space. So there's lots of things that people can already do even before the new legislation is finalized probably next year. Inspiration from local government examples, from previous discussions with councils, everybody is very keen to see examples from local government. We actually broaden the examples in general in IPEC to include all the public sector, but we've tried today to make sure we include about 3 or 4 local government examples in particular. Better understand the new legislation, of course, and start thinking about what less common procurement methods might be effective for you. So those less common procurement methods, we're going to touch on them today. I don't think that we're going to set you loose and you're going to be able to do it straight away. That's more session 2 and 3 and the other work that we do throughout IPEC. But hopefully it introduces those concepts to you today and at least kind of raises awareness in that sense. Next slide, please. So the agenda for today, as I've said, an introduction to Connected Places Catapult and IPEC Smarter Spending. Hopefully you appreciate we've just done that. Local government case studies and promising approaches. So Conrad Park, who I'll introduce in just a second, will be speaking on that topic. Some really great examples there. It was a pleasure discussing with him in the preparation for this event. The new legislation and the reform opportunity, that will be Malcolm Harbour. Malcolm is an associate director at Connected Places Catapult, but he has been involved in this space for a long time, and we're very glad that he's both been a part of Connected Places Catapult, but also other work with the LGA and so on. A regular speaker, you may have seen them earlier this year at Procurex and so on. Less common methods, CPC, and helping the public sector. Unfortunately, we've had a few tech issues, so I think that Raj's slides might be a little bit not how we intended. However, Raj Raghavala, our Procurement Innovation Manager, will be speaking. And I think it's really important that we show at Connected Places Catapult, we don't just talk the talk, we also walk the walk. So we do these things ourselves and we help other people throughout the public sector with them as well. Next slide. The last thing I'll say, so I've given the introduction to Connected Places Catapult and to Diatomic and IPEC and so on. What I would like to say just briefly is that, yes, today, as I've said, is dedicated to discussion around new legislation and less common procurement methods, which hopefully will be even more unlocked and kind of reinforced by the new legislation coming. However, it's important just to give a reminder that there are already opportunities that have existed for many years now. And so it isn't just a case of waiting around for new legislation to be the change. At Connected Places Catapult, particularly in IPEC, we realize that there's a lot of cultural and behavior change, which is important as well. You may see from session 2 being about stakeholder relationships, for example. That's where we kind of deep dive into this culture and behavior change that's required, as well as the technical knowledge around different methods and the kind of confidence in using them and so on. So things like pre-contract engagement have been formally part of legislation since 2015 and kind of allowed there. There are a range of different procurement methods which Conrad and Rad will both be talking about that are already kind of living and breathing and happening right now. And there's also good flexibility around small value contracts. So obviously those small kind of up to 50K-ish contracts, there's a lot you can do there without being constrained by the regulation. So just a quick reminder of that. And on to the next slide, which I believe should be Conrad. Yes, excellent. So I think, Conrad, probably best you introduce yourself, but as I've said, Conrad will be speaking about a little bit about the Birmingham Anchor Network and the kind of local economies work that he does. And in terms of local government case studies, we've got 3 to present to you, and we've called these kind of promising approaches because I think Conrad would also agree that he's been going on a learning journey and seeing some things that haven't worked, some things that have. We're going to share you some of the promising ones. With that, I shall pass over to Conrad.
Thank you very much, Nick. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'm Conrad Park. I've got the next 10 minutes. I'm the coordinator of the Birmingham Anchor Institution Network. I also work for an organisation called CLES, the Centre for Local Economic Strategy, an organisation that champions the idea that if we can keep money circulating locally in economies, everybody benefits. And in particular, we promote an approach called community wealth building that some of you may have heard of. Next slide, please. So this is what I'm going to cover in my 10 minutes. But what I want to particularly emphasize is, as Nick said, I'm not a procurement expert. I don't work within procurement. I'm not trained as a procurement officer. my observations today come from working alongside procurement teams and those observations as an outsider. Also, what I'm going to be talking about is innovative procurement, not the procurement of innovation, just to emphasize that. Next slide, please. So Birmingham Anchor Network, within the network, we've got a working group of procurement officers and heads of procurement. We've been working together now for 3.5 years. And what we're particularly looking at is how do we get more of our spend through local SMEs and high social value businesses, particularly social enterprises, cooperatives. The reason we want to do it is because all the evidence says money through social businesses and small businesses is more likely to then be recirculated again through the local economy by employing local people or by those businesses having local supply chains themselves. But the reason we're motivated to do this is the size of the prize we're looking at. Next slide, please. So Birmingham Anchor Network's been around since September 2019, 6 institutions in Birmingham. That's the local authority, a hospital trust, 2 universities and 2 housing associations. And collectively, they spend £2.5 billion a year. And the hospital trust alone spends 1.5 billion. So you can see, it just 1%, 2% shifts in these level of spend will mean a huge amount for local businesses and a huge amount for the local economy. However, our starting point is actually that Birmingham really does quite well with local spend already. When we did an initial study, 42% of the spend from the 6 institutions go locally and 60% within the region. To give you a comparison, people familiar with community wealth building will probably be aware of the Preston model and all the work Preston has done to localise spend. Well, their starting point was 14%. And they've now moved up to 40%, which is a remarkable achievement. But Birmingham's starting point is in itself 40. And one of the reasons for that is that Birmingham has a big economy. Spending locally is a bit more straightforward, is a bit easier. Next slide, please. So because of that, rather than looking at the big stuff, because we're already up at a high level of local spend, what we're looking at is what we call small contract spend, under 25k spend. And the reason we're doing this, are for the reasons there on the slide, is because we actually think we can benefit the SME and the social enterprise sector more with these small contracts, because they're lower risk. So a local authority and hospital trust more likely to take a risk with one of these businesses, and it also helps them get a first step on the ladder. So it might be a small contract now, but deliver that successfully, and you're on your way to delivering bigger contracts. So we did all this work, we mapped all this out, everybody was on board, procurement officers were on board, we thought there was a great opportunity. Next slide, please. Problem is we ran into, back one, please. We ran into a whole lot of issues. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail because I want to get to the proposed solutions and alternatives. But what I want to emphasize is nobody was doing anything wrong. It was just that the system itself didn't seem to work and enable the process. Procurement officers weren't being particularly difficult or obstructive. The businesses themselves weren't being reluctant to come forward and work and try and win contracts in the public sector. It's just the system itself wasn't working successfully. And what I came with as an outsider looking in was that there just seemed to be this piece in the jigsaw missing that could help bring these two ends, the businesses at one end of the supply chain, the institutions at the other, that could bring them together, bridge that gap maybe, and help them work more successfully. And what I'd like to highlight now are 3 different approaches that different areas have applied to putting that missing piece of the jigsaw in the puzzle. Next slide, please. So when I talk about community wealth building in England, that's a very much bottom up with local authorities and health trusts adopting it. In Scotland, they've adopted it at a national level. They've applied actual policy and procedure across the whole of Scotland and highlighted 6 areas to pilot community wealth building, one of which being North Ayrshire. And they've done a lot of this. They've done a lot of work on this, and particularly a lot of work on local procurement. And the bit they've identified is actually internal to the council, where they've employed a specialist officer to work between the council's procurement team that have got the opportunity and the council's business development team to be the bridge between the two. So when opportunities come up for a small contract, business development team tells the procurement development manager, they go to the business. Sorry, I missed that. They go to the business team who can then, let's say they're looking for somebody to deliver signage. The business development team will find 3 local businesses that do signage and get them to quote. But the role is actually even broader than that, because the procurement development manager actually works with those businesses. They work with the procurement officers to spot opportunities coming up well in advance so that they can develop the businesses well in advance. Not only that, they've got to a point now where when they've gone to the local market in North Ayrshire and they found no businesses in a particular sector, they're now working with businesses to develop skills and products in that sector so they can win work in the future. So that's very much a proactive local council-led approach. Next slide, please. Going to the other end of the pathway, at the business end, an approach that's been adopted here in Birmingham is one of the challenges we found when talking to small businesses and social enterprises. Why aren't you competing for public sector work? It was because they simply didn't have the time, and that they saw the process as too bureaucratic and too difficult, and they felt it wasn't worth them competing with the big players in the market who had tender writing teams who could really dedicate resource to this. So in one sector in Birmingham, and this is about mental health and living well, which is very rich in social enterprises particularly, they've formed a consortium called the Living Well Consortium, bringing 30 such organisations together to work collectively. And the beauty of this model, it means there's extra resource in there to handle the bureaucracy and the tender writing for the businesses, but for the commissioning agents, particularly within the NHS and the local authority, they just have one place to go to access 30 different organisations. And for the organisations themselves, what they've learned to do is to perhaps work collaboratively to go for bids bigger than they themselves individually could go for, or too complex for them individually to go for. And it's been a real success story, with the Living Well Consortium now having an annual turnover of £3.5 million, which I think is really admirable. Before I move on, I noticed Mondor Ram is in the audience, and I just wanted to make a reference to something he's delivered, which is the diversity supply chain project that also works at this end of the procurement pathway, working with businesses. And he's done some very successful work he might want to mention in conversation later on. And then finally, one more solution. Next slide, please. This is more like the bit in the middle. Institutions at one end, small businesses and social enterprises at the other. What we're actually doing in East Birmingham, and for those of you not familiar with East Birmingham, it is a hive of activity at the moment. It's the local authorities inclusive growth area. It's now a designated levelling up zone. It's also an investment zone. So there's a lot of money going into East Birmingham, and we want to make sure it gets to local businesses. So what we're doing in East Birmingham is using the Shared Prosperity Fund, Government Shared Prosperity Fund, to fund a local geographically based procurement hub, which will provide this facility of supporting procurement officers who wanted to procure locally by having the knowledge of local businesses. And again, working with those officers like the North Ayrshire model to scan the horizon and spot opportunities coming up to give themselves time, but also being the experts of the businesses on the ground and really knowing who's out there and supporting them to come forward. And we're hoping to have this up and running before March 24. So this is an actual practical example of what we're doing. That was, I think, almost exactly my 10 minutes. It was a very rapid run through, but hopefully it's given you at least some interesting ideas to start considering.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Conrad. I should say that I've spent about 8 to 10 years now trying to apply service design in local government prior to joining Connected Places Catapult. And so that includes innovation, creativity, a whole range of things. But it did include some time working with procurement teams and strategic commissioning teams around social value and the like. So I have some kind of experience and insights from that. And I also have a wealth of the IPEC discovery to date. And I can share, based on both of those, some of the insights that relate to what Conrad presented. So first of all, I already mentioned it earlier, those small contract values are an excellent opportunity for both SMEs and innovation. There's less regulation around them. But what typically happens, we've discovered, is that in terms of an innovation pipeline in councils, service teams will feel quite rightly that they can go out and spend these small amounts below £50,000 or so and try to pilot things and experiment and innovate. Great. What happens then is they are then successful 3, 6, 12 months later, and then the service team will come out knocking on procurement's door and saying, can we now have a few 100,000, 500,000, a few million to scale this up? Of course, from the procurement perspective, they don't know where this has come from. They haven't been part of that successful piloting process. And so there's this disjuncture in the innovation pipeline. So it's a great opportunity, but it can also lead to problems. What I like about the North Ayrshire example is that that particular opportunity was given directly to someone with responsibility. And so by aggregating and amalgamating all these different 50K pockets of money, they can have a strategic approach to how it's done, single point of contact, and so on. And then in the latter two examples around the consortia approaches and similar, I think it's important to recognize that SMEs are doing this kind of thing already. They're already paying consultancies to write bids for them to win public sector work and so on. But it's still not enough to make it to decrease that burden enough for many SMEs. And obviously, it's not ideal for SMEs to be paying other private organizations to try and win work. They should be able to do so through the tendering process or what have you. And I think it's important to realize that, again, with that consortia approach, one of the discussion points me and Conrad had was, okay, well, how can you best deploy your resources? So should we kind of pay people in-house to try and make everything better for SMEs and this, that, and the other? Or would it be better, say, for a local government institution to provide some kind of arm's length funding to one of these external organizations that can be a representative for the SMEs? I think it's important to say we're not giving answers in this call. As I said, we're giving opportunities and kind of potential solutions. I think it requires a bit more discussion to think about which ones exactly. But as I said, very promising on all these fronts. Is that fair to say, Conrad?
All good, Nick. Yeah.
Great. Next slide, please, Shanaz. Of course, Conrad's contact details, which we can happily pass out with Conrad's permission. Next slide. So just before I introduce some of these questions, which we will be putting in the chat as well, so please do engage with these questions. They'll be coming up periodically. We'll put them in the chat. Please do put your answers in the chat, so type them out. We will try to leave some room at the end for a little bit of discussion with mics. But yes, Grit, I can see already putting some of these questions in the chat. But at this point, Shanaz, apologies, I didn't mention earlier, but Steve is with us, and I'd like Steve to just briefly have a kind of 30 seconds, 2 minutes, just to give his take, because at the start of this call, I talked about the direction and work that IPEC and DIATOMIC are trying to achieve, whether it's through levelling up or whether it's innovative procurement, helping local SMEs, local government to meet decreasing budgets and increasing demand through innovation. I think there are quite a lot of talking points there. But Steve, are you able to introduce yourself and maybe just give your local take on the importance of some of these topics?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you for hosting this session as well, and the work with the DIATOMIC programme as well. Pleased to be part of that programme. I'm Steve Sandercock. I'm Assistant Director of Procurement with Birmingham City Council, and yeah, I mean, the importance of ensuring that circular economy, as you spoke about earlier on, Nick, and the the value that can bring is not to be understated. There's clearly from a local authority perspective the dimension that we want to increase that and enhance that, and the opportunities to, if you like, explore the boundaries of current procurement legislation and the opportunities that already present, and the coming changes in the 2024 legislation as well will be, I think it's an exciting time to be exploring these aspects. And I would also urge as well, I think there's some real value to be had from understanding how public sector supply chains can, if you like, be more transparent to enable SMEs that might not necessarily be able to bid or feel confident to bid direct for public sector work, but how they can then engage part of a prime supply relationship as well. And that's certainly something I'd be very keen to explore with colleagues as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve. I should say that, yes, there is quite a high proportion of Birmingham City Council members within the audience, but Conrad, the anchor networks, I believe there are 7 across the West Midlands. We are trying to kind of find examples across the West Midlands and engage various people across the West Midlands. I know there are other people in the audience who represent a wider range of institutions. Everyone's very welcome. I'm grateful to have you all in attendance today. So the 3 questions here just quickly that Grit has put in the chat. Have you heard of these approaches before? So have you heard of the approach of North Ayrshire of dedicating the small contracts to a particular staff member? Have you heard about ideas around external kind of organizations or vehicles that can be acting as consortia for SMEs to make it easier to bid, be a part of the process, win work, team up with others, scale up, and so on? Have you tried any of them? And are you interested in trying any of them? And why not? But I will leave that for the chat and answers to come in there. Next slide. I believe we should be welcoming Malcolm. So Malcolm is an associate director at Connected Places Catapult and part of the CRISP Procurement Research Group, as I've said previously. Malcolm has had a long history within this work, a pioneer in some ways, especially with his earlier work with the LGA. And today, Malcolm will be talking about the new legislation forthcoming and the opportunity that is coupled with that. So next slide, and welcoming Malcolm.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. And I must say that it's been great for me to be engaged with the Connected Places so closely because it plays to one of my really big enthusiasms, which is that we absolutely need to use public procurement in a far more imaginative and innovation-friendly way, and that particularly includes small businesses. And as many of you will know, and I know I've come across quite a few people in the audience in my work when I was representing the whole region in the European Parliament, but one of my major projects in the European Parliament was to develop the 2014 and 15 legislation. I just want to make a major point at the beginning to say that I've also been following the evolution of the new legislation, but I'm pleased to say it's very much an evolution rather than a revolution. And I think it's important to make that point because all the existing experience that you've had under the rules, particularly since 2015, which was a big change, have not been wasted at all, because actually all of that will feed directly into the opportunity we have by actually raising the profile of an importance of public procurement together, and also to integrating policy across the board. If we look at the next slide, you'll see I put a trace on here about the fact that this idea that public procurement is a really important driver of innovation is not a new idea. I put on the left there, unashamedly, the report that the LGA published in 2018, encouraging innovation in local government procurement. I wrote that report and I led the team that put it together. And that was actually thanks to one of Steve's predecessors, Nigel Kletz, who was the Chief Procurement Officer in Birmingham, who, when I retired from the European Parliament, invited me to take on that responsibility. But I'm pleased to say that since then, we've seen, obviously, the new white paper on the new legislation. about strategic levers to drive innovation. We've seen it in the innovation strategy. We've even seen the Prime Minister getting a letter from the leaders of the Science and Technology Council. And we've finally seen it incorporated specifically as a policy in the new Science and Technology Framework that came out just a few months ago. But one of the things I just wanted to pick up quickly in connection with my original report, one of my strong recommendations was that business development teams in councils have a tremendous role in working with the procurement teams in doing exactly what you saw, some of those really exciting projects that you've just heard from Conrad. And that's something that we need to think about. This isn't just exclusively an issue for procurement specialists. Actually, we want to make procurement specialists much more at the heart of the growing economy. And the second one of our recommendations was that in terms of overall policy making, it was crucial that the procurement specialists around the team with people in your local authorities who want to experiment with new ideas. Now, if we look at the next slide, if we can have that up, this is just a summary around what's in the Science and Technology Framework. And it talks about government departments creating a demand for innovation. I think it's really crucial that local government maintains what is in many cases a leadership role, because public procurement in local government is actually working really hard on smaller scale issues that can be scaled up. And it's also quicker and more able to respond in a way that some of the government departments, frankly, are really quite slow in adopting innovation. And that was one of the things that we came up with when we started doing our report. So I think we should absolutely make local government a leader in this area, and actually to show central government what can really be done by rethinking and reorganizing and encouraging people to take advantage of the procurement space. Now, how is that going to move forward? If we look at the next slide, if that's coming up. So if you look at the new legislation, and this isn't an occasion to go through the details of that, and indeed the government is investing lots of money, our money, in setting up a whole series of training programs about the fine details of the new procurement bill. I can say to you candidly, because it's in the public domain and others, that innovation has been put in the bill as an objective as to be worked through. But actually, most of the training materials are not about the innovation process. Because actually, we have more flexibility in the new bill to design competitive procurement methods. Many of you have already been doing that. The 2015 legislation put on the table gave you more methods to work with. But part of the issue is that people haven't been using them. And that's where our empowerment center comes up later. But in particular, and this came through very interestingly in Conrad's presentation, and this just doesn't apply to big ticket procurements, that actually making your local marketplace aware of your future requirements and nurturing the potential supply base for that is really a crucial part of delivering more innovative solutions, because your suppliers will have great ideas that way they want to sell into you. And I know this is something that Birmingham has been working on, because I remember going to a meeting in the Innovation Centre in the iCentrum, I think it was, in Birmingham a few years ago, where we had some innovators in medicine, and they said they were complaining at that stage that they found it quite difficult to engage with Birmingham procurement. I think that's already been changed, but it's something that you all have to work on. And contracting authorities have a duty to facilitate contract access for SMEs. Well, what does that mean? Well, it actually means that doing exactly what you've been doing in some of those different cases from Conrad is actually thinking about the scale of the contract that's on offer, and making sure that it's of the scale that companies can bid for, because your SMEs do not have a lot of spare headspace to respond in detail to complex tenders. But they do have great ideas you can work on. And there are a number of tools around doing And my colleague Raj will talk about those because he's far more expert than I am. But things like frameworks where people can pre-qualify and get into a list of potential suppliers and then be available to be drawn off, and dynamic markets as an evolution of that, are things that are being encouraged in this new legislation. And there are new ways of trying to make sure that those frameworks are more easily accessible and don't add excessive bureaucracy to SMEs to join them in the first place. And we also have, and I've quoted that exactly from the legislative guidelines, tell us once supplier registration databases. What's the big frustration that SMEs have that I talk to? They say that every time they go for a new contract, they have to resubmit all their details, and sometimes they're asked for different sets of information by different buyers. Now, having a single entry into the supplier registration database is already going to facilitate the use of SMEs, and that's something that's really important. We're now looking at the next slide. Let's just think about what the opportunities should be doing. And I just leave this and you can have a look at it later. But we need to really take opportunity, all of us in this community, to take advantage of the fact that public procurement reform is going to become more box office. And so the power of procurement and its profile, and getting procurement entering into strategic decision makings in local authorities in particular, as a creative and empowering tool, all of these things together we have to work on. And this is nothing to do with the legislation, by the way. It's actually taking advantage of the fact that people are talking about procurement. And so we should be looking to put innovation at the top of our thinking, and exceeding expectations. And we should be looking at societal and environmental challenges. And it's important that issues around social value, which I know that many of you are interested in, and how to engage and use more public enterprises, publicly owned enterprises, not-for-profit solutions, is really important. You know, procurement isn't all about buying things. It's actually about buying services in an innovative way. And that's something that we need to emphasize more. And there have been really great examples, actually, over the last few years, where big service delivery contracts, like children's services, for example, have been delivered through an innovative process. And there are cases around that. And above all, we need to attract and build innovative new enterprises to grow the local economies. So we want people to deliver local services. But what we also want are innovative businesses in our regions who have a fantastic idea that we can help them develop because they're improving the delivery of public services in Birmingham. And then from that, the world is their oyster because other people will want those services. And we need to just be ambitious and think about it in those terms. So I just put the box at the end, overcoming risk aversion, which Nick's already talked about. We need to learn and use the new freedoms. We need, above all, to think in terms of enhancing competition, because part of the issue, why we're only having many cases having single tenders, as he showed in that chart, is there isn't enough competition in the marketplace because we don't allow that to flourish. And we have to challenge all the perceived constraints, and a lot of them are perceived. The lesson from my work with the local government team, when we went round talking to people, we said to them, what is the problem that you have? Is it legislation? And the answer is it's not the legislation. It's how you use it. Because there's far more opportunities in the existing rules that people are using. And you saw that from the case studies. And above all, that's about engaging with the market earlier and exchanging ideas and learning from others. And also, I think we could do much more in building partnerships between authorities who have similar challenges to meet and actually sharing procurement power to develop new solutions. And that's something that I hope will be facilitated by the new legislation. Now, what does that mean in practice? Well, I've got a chart here, and I think that's going to come up next. If not, we'll move on one slide. Let's see the next slide. There it is. Now, that is a big arrow, which I'm just going to fill in quickly. But above all, it's about defining what our unmet needs are and not prescribing solutions. That's not the way we'll get innovation, because we want to challenge people to give us innovations. And what I'm going to show you, and let's have the first piece of my build-up chart, please. The first click. Thinking about what you're going to procure and what needs it's going to meet is really important in getting people to bring you ideas. And we should be doing much more about putting those unmet needs out into the marketplace. And as is sometimes described by people, adopting a clean sheet approach. Put your unmet needs out and invite people to write on a page how they can help you meet those. And then what do we do next then? Next slide, please, or next click, please. Then we can go out into the marketplace. You can refine your specifications. Next slide, please. You can define the challenges that you want to meet. And one of the things that's been an issue with public procurement is that people have been reluctant to go out into the marketplace early because they somehow think it infringes some of the basic conditions about an open and transparent and non-discriminatory process. It doesn't. And that's made clear in the new bill. That's one of its main achievements. And so we need to understand and look at what's happening. Next click. And we need to be demanding and think in terms of how those unmet needs are going to be described. And that increasingly will include zero value. It will include social value. It will include things like employment criteria. It will include innovation, but don't over-define the solution and spend time on that process. I mean, the best solutions are really generated by putting resources, engagement, and time in upfront and not rushing to solutions and rushing out into the marketplace. Next click. So the next click is about developing that strategy there and how you're going to do that. And next click will say that we need to think about, and our terminology, as catalysts. And that's our ethos, as you saw from the opening presentations. How to partner with innovative companies, and in some cases, to be a partner in commercializing an innovation, helping them to develop that innovation to your end requirements. Because you know that the great solutions then are going to help those businesses, and they're going to be good for your clients, for your city as well. And click next, please. And that means that we need to think about the procurement strategy. And one of the things about the new procurement strategy is it's brought together what's called an open competitive procedure to help you design the sort of partnership process you want to do, embracing partners and engaging innovative SMEs. Now, there's nothing particularly new about having open competitive procedures, because some of them are already defined in the legislation that you have in front of you at the moment. In the 2015 procurement bill, you could do things like competitive dialogue, competitive procedures. You can even have an end-to-end innovation partnership. Now, if you're working on any of those, you've got the experience to just move seamlessly into this process. This is not a stop. It's actually an open invitation to say, well, we're not going to confine you to those procedures. You can actually reinvent and adjust those to yourselves, and particularly think about how you want to get the innovative companies into a big contract at the end. And so those are the next bubbles to complete in my build-up slide. That's when you go out for proposals and then finally award contracts. And then hopefully you work then with the suppliers to deploy it in the most efficient way. That's my final bubble. Now, that's the overall chart from idea to solution. And I just want to finally say that is not my original idea. I got this chart from people I know in the Flanders government, who in my view are running the most effective innovation procurement system of any regional country in Europe. And this is what they use to sensitize the people that are coming into their procurement process. So, this is an international a game that we're playing. It's not just one that's Birmingham-centred or West Midlands-centred. It's actually about us making Britain more competitive and looking for companies that we can develop through that stage. So next slide. that's just to remind you, and I should have mentioned that earlier. Of course, developing skills to do all this, of course, it is going to be a shared responsibility, and hopefully we can use the government's program to help us do that. Now, next slide. I think it's my end slide or not. Yeah. You heard from Nick about the Innovation Procurement Empowerment Centre, and I think you can understand why it's called empowerment and how it's going to fit together. Because we believe that we need to share more knowledge around the chart I've just shown you. You've already seen some great case studies. They're exactly the sort of things we want to put in the Empowerment Centre. And you will be working on other ideas in procurement. The UK regions, the Welsh government is doing great things. The Scottish government is doing great things. In Northern Ireland, they're doing great things. And I'm chairing this research consortium because we want to collect information and data from you about what's working. We want to document it. We want to analyze and understand it. We want to provide you with guidelines about what are the best things to do, which are based around the most successful outcomes. And so I hope you'll join us on Tuesday the 12th, when I will be involved with the team in presenting IPEC to you. So thank you very much indeed. And I think I'm now handing out. Are we going to have a few questions, Nick? Have I been quick enough to allow the odd question?
Malcolm, you've been perfect. All of our speakers so far have been perfect. I'm very glad that we're running on time. However, I fear that I will be shot by you, Malcolm and Steve, because I've in trying to move one of the slides around and having technical difficulties, I think it's been missed out. And I just wanted to quickly touch upon it because I think it involves some of what Malcolm and Steve was talking about. So Steve was talking about that idea of local value and keeping it in the area and the kind of cumulative effect it can have as you grow SMEs. That means you grow jobs, you grow investment. And the slide that's missing talks about how where SMEs are procured in the public sector, that increases both the amount of investment that the company will make itself in the local area, but it also increases the investment going into the company. It improves the credibility and the ability for that company to achieve that investment. So when we talk about the public sector playing an important part, it's not just procuring the innovation, making use of the innovation and supporting the SME as is, but it's actually a key role, a key early stepping stone in many SMEs' journey to secure further investment and to kind of grow as a bigger player in the local area. So apologies, I missed that off. But yes, lots of talking points there from Malcolm. I think consistent with our message that as well as the legislation reform and changes, the competitive flexible procedure and other aspects, it's also a case of just doubling down in some regards as to what we already have. Like Malcolm said, it's more of a evolution rather than a revolution. And that means that there's a big responsibility to all of us on the call to try and work on those behavior changes and culture changes now and after the legislation reform. I think, yes, to answer your question directly, Malcolm, as well, because we are running quite nicely to schedule, we had a few tech issues with Raj's slides, and we've covered a lot of material. I think it's probably a good point to maybe just pause and open up to the floor for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. I will ask to go to the next slide so that Grit can put some of the questions following Malcolm's piece, sorry, slide before Shanaz. So how would you rate your innovation culture and behaviors out of 10? Who champions the culture and ecosystem of stakeholders? And who are some of the stakeholders that you have brought into the innovative procurement space? A few questions that Grit will be popping in the chat there. Please contribute there. But yes, anyone else, if you would like to ask a question, I think we've been watching the chat and I'm not
looking at the chat already.
Yeah, but if anyone wants to ask a question or make a statement based on anything they've heard, now's the time for it.
Yeah.
Is there anyone? Maybe Monda. Conrad suggested there's some work you've been doing which is relevant. Also, I see Richard has joined the call. Hello, Richard, if you want to contribute from your perspective.
Yeah, I could just say a few words. Well, first of all, thank you for the presentations.
Great, thanks, Wanda.
They're really helpful, and it's really positive to see so much interest in this topic. My particular interest has been about inclusion, diversity and inclusion in the supply chain. And so when we've been working in this space for well over 20 years, and we set up many years ago an initiative that is still running. We set up in 2004 an initiative which is still running today called Minority Supplier Development UK, which is based on the American model of getting diverse suppliers supplying corporate supply chains. We set it up while I was at the university, but it's spun out now, and it's still going well. And the project that Conrad kindly alluded to was the Diverse Supply Chain Project, was built on the same kind of research base. But again, the theme was inclusion. And I mean, I think that project, that initiative, which started during the height of the pandemic, was very positive in that it showed there's a real need for this kind of work. It was really interesting, the discussion on bid writing, and that having that capacity in-house. It is a real deterrent. It is a real deterrent for SMEs to get involved in this space. I know Charles is on the call, particularly for sort of social enterprise, minority enterprise, who one of the key characteristics from the research of these kinds of businesses is that they're not in the networks that matter. They don't have the right kind of access to business support. The networks that would put them with a fighting chance to get some of these supply chains and consortia. It's a great idea in principle. I think it's challenging to operationalize with these firms as well, particularly if they haven't got the right support. But I think it is a huge opportunity, and I think the more we can integrate the whole discourse on innovation with inclusion, I think the better we stand in order to genuinely get both. So I very much welcome the presentation, and I hope that there'll be more that draws these different networks into the same kind of networks that minority entrepreneurs inhabit. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yes. Thank you, Monda. And I come back to the point again that, yes, Charles in the chat, just to bring some of that into the call, Charles said that there were some pros and cons to the consortia approach. Monda, it sounds like some views you have as well. I think it's important to say that within this particular call, we're trying to be cover a lot of ground, bring a lot of different kind of ideas, maybe a bit more original and fresh to people. But I think throughout the longer period of IPEC community events, I think the structure is more to do a deep dive with one particular speaker from a local government who has implemented one approach or so rather fully. And so again, it's just to remind everyone that we will be delivering that kind of locally based content within Diatomic in the Innovation and Procurement series, the 3 sessions, but there is a wider world of resources and community events out there where you can get more in-depth perspective, or you can create connections beyond the West Midlands. Is there anyone else that would like to contribute anything at this point, or should we move on to Raj? Again, I'm just looking through. Shariat potentially might have something to say, or Richard.
I'll follow up on Monda's points, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think diverse supply chains is really important. It's a priority for Birmingham City Council, following the everyone's battle, everyone's business. So that's topical and really important, and as I'm sure Wanda knows, challenging. Also, the social value direction given by central government when they came up with their social value methodology focused on diverse businesses. And I think that was mostly driven from COVID and the lessons learned from that, because it was produced at that time. So these two directions coming together really need to direct us towards how we support diverse businesses. And as Manda says, they are excluded from the decision-making process, and they're not in the room. So anyway, challenge for us to address.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sharat. Is there anyone else, or should we pass over to Raj?
Yeah, sorry, Nick, just very quickly, and just to build on what Shariat said there around the diverse and inclusive supply chain, I'd certainly welcome a broader conversation with Monda, possibly if we can connect outside of this call, Monda, on that one. I think also it's just, you know, there are other ways of, you know, a lot of the information that you, Malcolm, some fairly straightforward but simple initiatives around, you know, publishing your pipeline, or you know, going to the market early, soft market engagement. You know, it's simple things, but it does have a, you know, it does have a beneficial impact going forward. So I you know, I would encourage others to do to do that. And also just to you know, I think an initiative that from a Birmingham City Council perspective that we're particularly proud of has been the work that we've done with around the Match My Project initiative, where we've interwoven that into our social value requirements of threshold, above the 177 threshold tenders, where suppliers have to, if you like, put forward a proposal that will deliver Match My Project initiative, where local community groups register a community need, and suppliers can then, you know, be able to you know, support and deliver on that as well. So I've just sort of do that, mention that as well.
Yeah, and it's great you picked up on some of those specific ways that we can try and improve things with SMEs, whether it's through market engagement and so on. One of the things that we do through our cohort activities, for example, is support local governments in understanding how best to identify SMEs, how to communicate, how to do that work of communicating to the market, because we work on both sides of the fence, as it were. We work with innovative SMEs a lot at Connected Places Catapult, dedicated teams, lots of accelerators, trials, and so on that we run, SME databases that we search, and SME events, investor events that we regularly have. We have that really close connection to SMEs, and it means that we can get that kind of feedback around when do they need to know what's coming up, and in what way would they like to be told. Likewise, we can also kind of help local governments in finding those local SMEs or the specific SMEs to the innovation need, and we can kind of help around those things. So there are some tools and resources that will be coming out over the course of the IPEC community and cohort work. We will be releasing tools and little articles and blog pieces and so on like that kind of describe some of those things. So that's another resource to keep an eye out for. And I think at that point also a good time to bring in Raj. And I think when I asked Raj to speak in this session, it can be easy, we're an hour or so in now, it can be easy for us to kind of talk about what could be done and to kind of share these insights and case studies. But I think it's also important to show that we try ourselves to implement these things, and we help a range of public sector organizations with how to do them prior or in other activities which aren't part of Diatomic and so on. So Raj, if you could touch a little bit on the work we do internally and the way that we help some of the public sector organizations, that would be great.
Thanks, Nick. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Raj Wagan. I'm the Procurement Innovation Manager here at CPC. I've been here for about 3.5 years. I've worked for private and public organisations throughout my career, including local authorities. And as Nick mentioned, and some of the less common methods that Conrad mentioned, what do we do in CPC? Well, we've got a network of 4,000 SMEs that we can tap into, which is quite useful. And also in terms of going forward, we'll look at 2 examples, one internal CPC and have a look at one external where we help in the public sector. Next slide, please. So as Nick has mentioned, we definitely try to practice what we preach. We like to have case studies and examples where we're trying to make offers to other organisations to definitely back it up with some evidence that the approach actually works. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, the example I'll be talking about will be a design contest for Network Rail. Next slide, please. And we do all of that was Conrad mentioned in terms of early market engagement, trying to get SMEs to work together, try SMEs to get involved in a lot of the stuff that CPC do. And we do a lot of pre-procurement, pre-commercial R&D stuff, which is pilot and trials. And we found that a lot of the smaller organizations seem to have a lot more innovative ideas in terms of the areas that we're looking at. And there are 6 sort of main areas that we're sort of looking into, drone technology or hydrogen fuels, automated vehicles and those kind of things. And we also have in our bigger procurements tried to allow SMEs to submit a form to say that we can offer these services, and if the winning organisation would like to approach us, here's our contact details. So there is a number of things that we've already done, and a lot of these were mentioned before. Next slide, please. So at CPC, we've created 3 dynamic purchasing systems. There's one for innovation advisory services, SME academic services, and also marketing events. We find we've got at least 6 organisations that are single-person organisation, which is unusual to get onto the framework. But we've also got 60% of the organisations are all SMEs. And the way that we approached it was to look at the due diligence, how we carry that out, and how we can make it a bit more SME friendly. So normally in public sector, you have 2 times annual contract value, which almost eliminates most SMEs in a competition like this. So we removed that barrier. We also removed some of the items, made them a tick list to make the application process a lot more easier. So we've been running the first one for about a year. We've had almost 50 call-offs within that DPS. So it's definitely running. It's approximately 1.6 million. And I would say at least 50% has gone to the smaller SMEs who are part of the DPS supply list. Next slide, please. So the slides are missing, as Nick mentioned earlier. The design contest was to do with track buckle detection for Network Rail. And we're just coming up with various ideas of how you could detect those after a storm, or whether it can be detected after a long heat session, or generally it being constantly detected. So I ran a design contest in conjunction with Network Rail. We put the challenges out. We had a number of organisations that responded to the design contest. We had a jury panel to assess the proposals that were coming in, and there were quite different proposals, different sorts of technologies being used. And through this exercise, then Network Rail were able to progress and actually have 6 organisations, all SMEs, to £100,000 award through the design contest. it's normally a prize that's given, and in this case, the prize was actually money. So the SMEs are now working on those trials at the moment and doing those. So that was a couple of examples, and I think now we've got moving on to some questions. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Raj. Again, apologies that the slides didn't present all the content that we prepared. However, it was good to have a quick touch base with Raj there around particularly DPSs and design contests. As we've said previously, there are a range of procurement methods that are recognised, allowed and supported and in use already, such as DPS and design contests. I would say that it appears that with the kind of flexible method and other opportunities in the new legislation, it may be that we can combine these into hybrid approaches or combine them into kind of existing approaches and so on. So it's, again, definitely one area to brush up on and maybe get a little bit of experience with. And I think one of the biggest strengths of these particular processes is that they suit certain kind of situations very well. A design contest, for example, puts information, terms and conditions and kind of things like that up front, which is more encouraging for SMEs to join. DPSs and design contests can also be used, relatively speaking, for a range of values, but they do work with those smaller contract sizes very well. And as we've said before, the smaller contract sizes definitely help SMEs and innovative proposals. And apart from that, I think we're about to wrap up. So if anybody has any final points that they'd like to make or questions to raise, Malcolm, I can see your hand up. Is that a fresh hand?
Yes, I mean, perhaps just a response on, because I've been following the chat fairly energetically. Just 2 points at this stage. I think first of all, it will be important to keep up pressure on the government to deliver its promised systems of one entry. I mean, the supplier register. One entry only system, which I think is really important for SMEs. The second thing is actually to use also electronic e-submissions as well. And again, there are provisions in this legislation which actually move on to what we put into the European legislation to say that essentially being able to submit tenders electronically is a default position. And if it's also linked into your, if you're an SME where you have essentially an electronic passport, you have all your details already emitted in the system, is going to be very important. The second thing that you'll hear more about when you go to, those of you that are going to the government bill announcements, is about collecting more data through the procurement process. This is particularly for larger contracts, actually. But nevertheless, there is going to be more data available about how contracts are progressing. But anyway, just to say, I think we need, I would say to everybody, it's really important to keep up pressure through your representatives, through the LGA, through council leaderships, to get these implementing tools underway and get the government to actually roll them out.
Great, thank you, Malcolm. I also pick up on the point that Carolina makes in chat, and I think it's important to say that what we've painted today is quite a long journey that we all need to embark on, and there's lots to do in many areas. The approach that we've taken in IPEC and Diatomic is to focus a little bit more, particularly with regards to innovation and procurement, is to focus a little bit more on within the organization, how those relationships work, because it's seen that it's hard to get good relationships outside of the organization with SMEs and so on if you've got a lack of communication, a lack of alignment, people not really appreciating shared problems, shared goals, shared resources within councils or between councils, then to put a united and kind of strategic and friendly and helpful face externally is going to be challenging. So we see it as a kind of progression to build. There are activities, as I say, that Connected Places Catapult does in general. Also within the Diatomic project, we will be running an accelerator. And so we're trying to tackle this from multiple angles, but the general angle within these 3 sessions will be focusing a little bit more internally on how to organize the kind of different stakeholders within an organization. And I think that it was already touched upon earlier how sometimes procurement teams are seen as the black sheep or the blocker to innovation. And it's not always the case. And I think it's the fact that we need to try and bring in members of legal teams who see procurement as quite low value, high risk. We need to bring in members of finance teams who maybe see procurement as a leaky tap, where a budget that needs to be cut. And I think the point that Malcolm has made very strongly, and we would certainly like to continue throughout this series, is that procurement can be a strategic tool, and it really relies upon a wide range of different stakeholders to participate and all contribute value. And hopefully over time we can improve communication and relationships so that together different teams, whether it's procurement teams and finance and legal and service teams, all going together to, say, a council leadership to try and have open and influence that strategic discussion. So hopefully that's a little bit of a segue into session 2 and a little bit of a taster as to where we're going with that. Shanaz, I believe there's 1 or 2 slides left just to tie things up nicely.
Nick, could I just add something, which I have put in the chat as well, but just to say that we do have Connected Places has a LinkedIn group, which you can join, where we're putting our future programs up, and also we quite often put think pieces and things up there, and I would encourage you to contribute your ideas through LinkedIn as well. And I think you can presumably we'll be able to circulate these slides and also give everyone contact details. I put mine in the chat.
Yes, we'll see how that develops across the 3 sessions, but that's certainly the idea. Okay, Shanaz, I think that again, slight technical difference. There we go. So the innovation and procurement sessions, as we've said, this was session 1, new legislation, less common methods. We had a lot of speakers and a lot of material. It wasn't completely interactive and as maybe we would usually like these kinds of sessions to be. But in session 2 and session 3, we already have plans, as I said, for much more interaction, more facilitators on the call, creating breakout rooms and smaller teams, really kind of emphasizing that peer-to-peer learning aspect. So session 2 will certainly be far more interactive. And then session 3, as I said, is a gamified approach. So hopefully there will be parts for everyone that is part of that session to play throughout the call. And again, different opportunities with facilitators or amongst teams to have conversations and interactions there. And the last slide, I think we've covered it quite a few times, but just a reminder, there is an IPEC website. There will be forthcoming material and toolkits, and the community starts next month with a new program of events. Thank you, everyone, very much, and I hope you all have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.